Mother and daughter are humiliated for being poor. But years later, they buy his ranch. The old bus pulled into the dusty station of Pine Valley, a small town in rural Tennessee. Among the few passengers stepping off, Elaine Miller and her daughter Sophia observed the scene with tired but determined expressions. They had traveled nearly 2 days from the northeast, carrying only 2 worn suitcases and many hopes. The scene at the main house of Sunrise Ranch had been deeply humiliating. In front of dozens of elegantly dressed guests at the annual charity auction, rancher William Montgomery, owner of the most valuable property in the region, pointed at Elaine and Sophia, who were serving the tables. "Look what we have here," he exclaimed with disdain, his voice echoing through the decorated hall. "2 hungry souls from the city thinking they can mix with society folks." Silence fell over the room. Elaine, with her 42 years marked by hard work, kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Sophia, at 19, blushed intensely while trying to control herself. "Let them serve the drinks, since they aren't qualified for anything else," William continued, drawing forced laughter from some guests. "It's the natural destiny of their kind, to serve those who have the capacity to build something in life." William was an imposing man, tall, always impeccably dressed, with his characteristic light-colored suit and gold watch he made sure to display. His eyes, however, carried a calculating coldness that contrasted with the social smile he distributed among influential guests. "Please, sir." "We're just working," murmured Elaine, holding the tray with trembling hands. "Work? This is charity." "Woman," William laughed, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "Who else would hire 2 unqualified drifters? You should be on your knees thanking me for the opportunity to set foot in a house like this." In the kitchen, away from the guests' eyes, Sophia clenched her fists tightly. Her dark eyes, inherited from her mother, shone with indignation. She wore the mandatory black and white uniform for the event's waitresses, but even that couldn't disguise her natural beauty. "I can't take it anymore, Mom," she whispered, while organizing the glasses. "Why do we have to accept this treatment?" Elaine sighed, adjusting her gray hair secured in a simple bun. "We need the money, honey. You know that." What no one at that party could imagine was that this moment of humiliation would mark the beginning of a journey that years later would completely transform the lives of everyone involved. In the town center, Pine Valley displayed a typical small-town square with its church, gazebo, and benches under leafy trees. A quiet place where everyone knew each other, but also where secrets could remain hidden for generations. It was a town of contrasts, ranchers' mansions and simple cottages, divided by the invisible line separating those born with silver spoons from the workers who sustained the local economy. 5 years had passed since that public humiliation. Now Sophia, graduated with honors in agricultural science from State University, returned to Pine Valley accompanied by her mother. Both stepped out of their rental car in front of a small inn. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" asked Sophia, observing the town that had changed little. Elaine adjusted her simple framed glasses and smiled discreetly. "More than ever." Meanwhile, the situation at Sunrise Ranch had changed drastically. William Montgomery paced back and forth in his office, holding papers that confirmed the unthinkable. His ranch, a symbol of power for 3 generations, would be auctioned in 30 days due to accumulated debts. "How could this happen?" he shouted at the accountant, a small man who shrank with each word. "They were just a few loans to expand production." "Mr. Montgomery, I tried to warn you about the risks, the accumulated interest, the unsuccessful stock investments, the decline in production," the accountant stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. William slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, making the picture frames topple. "Who's going to buy my land?" he growled. "Do you have any idea of the shame I'll endure? Me, a Montgomery, losing everything to some competitor who will enjoy my ruin." At the other social extreme of town, in a modest room at the inn, Elaine and Sophia were talking with a middle-aged lawyer who examined old documents with a magnifying glass. "These deeds are authentic," he confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "Part of these lands really belonged to your family before being acquired by the Montgomerys under questionable circumstances." Elaine picked up the yellowed photo she had kept for decades. In it, her father, a simple man but with a determined look, appeared in front of a farmhouse. "My father died believing. He had been legally dispossessed of this land," she said, her voice breaking. "He never knew he was deceived. And now, Mr. Jenkins?" asked Sophia, holding her mother's hand. The lawyer slowly closed his briefcase. "Now, ladies, we go to the bank. We have an auction to plan." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the days that followed were of intense preparation. Sophia, with her technical knowledge, studied maps and soil analyses of the region, while Elaine sewed at night for a local shop, saving every penny. The goal was clear, but the path would be difficult. At Pine Valley Central Bank, manager Richard Palmer couldn't hide his surprise at receiving Elaine and Sophia in his office. "So, you ladies are interested in participating in the Sunrise Ranch auction?" he asked, studying them over his glasses. "We are," Sophia confirmed firmly, "and I'd like to understand all the necessary procedures." The manager exchanged glances with his assistant, who was trying to disguise an ironic smile. "Miss Miller, correct? Do you have any idea of the starting bid value?" "I have all the values noted here," responded Sophia, opening an organized folder, "including a complete analysis of the property's devaluation over the last 5 years due to poor management." The manager's expression changed. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "I see. But still, it's a significant amount. If I may ask, do you have proof of compatible income?" It was Elaine who answered with surprising calm. "We have everything that's necessary, Mr. Palmer, and a bit more." The following week, the main topic in Pine Valley's cafes and grocery stores was the presence of the two women in town. Speculations ran wild, especially after they were seen talking with former Sunrise Ranch employees. At the Central barbershop, old Joe, who had been cutting hair for over 50 years, shared his memories with customers. "I knew her father, the late Thomas Miller," he said, handling his scissors with precision. "Honest man, had a good piece of land that bordered the Montgomerys. One fine day, a paper appeared saying he had sold everything, died swearing he never signed any document." Those present nodded their heads, familiar with similar stories. Pine Valley had been built on land arrangements that weren't always transparent. Throughout the town, news of the Sunrise Ranch auction provoked varied reactions. For some, it was the end of an era. For others, the chance for late justice. And for William Montgomery, it was an unbearable humiliation. On a particularly hot afternoon, when the sun punished the cobblestone streets of the town, Sophia was visiting the local shops for supplies. At the Central Market, she ended up bumping into a tall man carrying boxes. "I'm sorry," she said, helping to collect the fallen fruit. "My fault," he replied, looking up. Their eyes met, and there was a moment of mutual recognition. It was Daniel, Montgomery, William's youngest son, whom Sophia had briefly met during her time working at the ranch. Daniel, unlike his father, had always had a reputation for treating employees well. With a degree in biology, he had tried to implement sustainable practices on the ranch, but was always blocked by his father's inflexible traditions. "You're Sophia, right?" he asked with a genuine smile. "You worked at one of our parties." She nodded, tense. She hadn't expected this encounter. "What brings you back to town?" asked Daniel, apparently unaware of the situation. "Business," she replied succinctly. "And you carrying boxes?" His smile diminished slightly. "Tough times, Dad. Well, the ranch isn't doing well. I'm trying to help however I can." An uncomfortable silence hung between them. Sophia noticed he no longer wore designer clothes, but a simple shirt and faded jeans. "Well, I need to go," she said, moving away. "Good to see you," replied Daniel, watching her leave. What Sophia didn't notice was the prolonged look he cast in her direction, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper that even he didn't yet understand. That night at the Montgomery family dinner, considerably more modest than the banquets of other times, Daniel mentioned the encounter. "You won't believe who I ran into today, Dad. That waitress, Sophia, the daughter of that northern woman who worked for us." William, who was absently stirring his whiskey, raised his eyes with sudden interest. "The drifter? What's she doing here?" "Not sure. Said she came on business." The patriarch narrowed his eyes, thoughtful. What kind of business could a maid have in Pine Valley? Daniel frowned, uncomfortable with his father's tone. "She didn't look like a maid anymore, Dad. She was well-dressed, confident, different from how I remember her." Catherine, Daniel's mother and William's wife, an elegant woman who maintained her composure even in the worst moments, intervened. "Let it go, William. We have bigger problems to worry about than the return of former employees." But William couldn't drop the subject. Something about the coincidence deeply bothered him. With a sudden movement, he picked up the phone. "I'm going to call Palmer. I want to know who's interested in the auction." In her rented apartment, Sophia was telling her mother about the unexpected encounter. "He seemed different, Mom. Less arrogant." Elaine looked up from the embroidery she was doing. "Don't trust appearances, honey. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But he was always kind to the staff, you said so yourself." Her mother sighed, setting aside her needle. "Sophia, we can't lose focus. We came here with a purpose. Don't forget what we went through in that house, what they did to your grandfather." Sophia nodded, knowing her mother was right. But something about the way Daniel had looked at her remained in her thoughts. The following days brought an unexpected development. Daniel began to appear by chance in the same places Sophia frequented. At the Squares Cafe, at the public library, at the farmer's market. With each encounter, they exchanged a few words, increasingly less tense, increasingly more personal. On a particularly pleasant afternoon, sitting on a bench in the central square under the generous shade of an oak tree, the conversation flowed with surprising naturalness. "I always wanted to transform Sunrise into a model of sustainable production," explained Daniel as they fed the pigeons. "But my father, he sees the world differently. For him, it's exploit or be exploited." Sophia observed him with genuine interest, torn between the mission that brought her there and the attraction she was beginning to feel for the son of the man who had humiliated her family. "Must be difficult," she commented, "having such different views." Daniel smiled sadly. "You know what's worse? Seeing something you love being destroyed by stubbornness. The ranch isn't failing because times changed, but because my father refused to change with them. And now, with the auction..." The young Montgomery threw the last piece of bread and faced the horizon. "Now it's too late. Someone will buy it, probably a competitor or out-of-town company, and transform everything into export monoculture. Hundreds of families who depend on the ranch will be left without livelihood." Sophia felt a pang in her chest. This aspect, the workers' families, hadn't been considered in her plan for revenge. "Do people in town, do they blame your father?" "Some do. Others look at us with pity. It's strange, you know. I grew up being the boss's son. Now I'm almost an equal." He paused, reflecting. "And I discovered I prefer it this way." The sun was beginning to set, painting Pine Valley's sky with orange hues. Daniel stood up, extending his hand to help her. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked, with hesitation in his voice. Sophia knew she should refuse, that she was dangerously approaching, a line she had promised not to cross. But something in those eyes, in the sincerity of that voice... "Maybe," she replied, smiling slightly. Back at the inn, she found Elaine talking with Mr. Jenkins, the lawyer. Both had serious expressions. "What happened?" she asked, worried. "William Montgomery," answered the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. "He's asking questions about you. Seems he noticed your interest in the auction." Elaine nervously wrung her hands. "He can't prevent our participation, can he?" "Legally, no. But I've known William for decades. He's not a man who plays fair when he feels threatened." "What should we do?" asked Sophia, sitting beside her mother. Mr. Jenkins closed his briefcase with a sigh. "Keep a low profile. And Sophia, be careful who you talk to in town. William has eyes and ears everywhere." That night was sleepless for Sophia. Images mixed in her mind. Her mother's humiliated look 5 years ago, the photo of the grandfather she never knew, Daniel's sincere smile that afternoon. As the auction drew closer, her feelings became more complex. In the Montgomery mansion, the atmosphere was heavy. William, visibly altered by alcohol, searched through old documents in his office when Catherine entered. "It's almost 2 in the morning, William. Come to bed." He didn't raise his eyes. Her name kept nagging at me. Miller, knew I'd heard it before. Catherine approached, tired. "Who are you talking about?" "The woman, the northerner, Elaine Miller." He held up a yellowed document. "Her father was Thomas Miller, owner of those lands on the southern border, remember?" Catherine's expression subtly changed. "Those that your father acquired?" William gave a dry laugh. "Acquired is an elegant word for what happened, isn't it?" He took another sip of his drink. "My father deceived him. Forged documents. Thomas never sold anything." "Why are you digging this up now?" asked Catherine, visibly disturbed. "Because she's back. His daughter is back with his granddaughter. On the eve of the auction. Too much coincidence, don't you think?" Catherine sat down, suddenly pale. "You think they know?" William slammed his fist on the table. "Of course they know. They came for revenge. They came to destroy what's left of the Montgomery name. William, nobody can prove anything after so much time." His gaze was icy. "Really? And if they have the original documents? If they have proof of the forgery?" The heavy silence that followed was answer enough. Catherine rose slowly. "What do you intend to do?" "Whatever necessary," he replied, with a dark determination, "as my father did before me." The next morning brought alarming news. Elaine received a call from the bank, informing her there were irregularities in her documentation for the auction and that she needed to come urgently for clarification. "This is William's doing," said Mr. Jenkins when informed. "He must have pressured Palmer." "What do we do?" asked Elaine, distressed. "We'll go to the bank right now. They can't create arbitrary obstacles." Meanwhile, Sophia received a message from Daniel asking to meet her urgently. Reluctant but curious, she agreed to see him at the most discreet cafe in town. "My father discovered who you are," he said as soon as they sat at a secluded table. "He's furious, Sophia. He's making calls, pressuring people. I think he's going to try to prevent you from participating in the auction." Sophia's heart raced. "How did he find out?" "Old documents. He recognized the Miller name." Daniel hesitated. "Sophia, there's something you need to know about your family's history and mine." "I already know," she interrupted, her eyes fixed on her cup. "I know your grandfather forged documents to steal my grandfather's land, that your father continued the legacy of exploitation, that your family built a fortune on my family's misery." Daniel paled. I didn't know any of this until last night. I swear, Sophia." "And now that you know," the question hung between them, loaded with silent expectations. Daniel reached across the table, lightly touching her fingers. "Now I want to help right this wrong. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. At the bank, Elaine and Mr. Jenkins faced bureaucratic resistance orchestrated by William. Manager. Palmer, visibly uncomfortable, presented a series of additional requirements that hadn't been mentioned before. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller, but we need additional guarantees. The amount involved is significant." Mr. Jenkins maintained his composure, but his irritation was visible. "Mr. Palmer, we are aware that these requirements are not standard. We are also aware that Mr. Montgomery was here yesterday." The manager adjusted his tie, nervous. "I don't see how that would be relevant." "Then perhaps it would be relevant to mention that we have a meeting scheduled with the regional superintendent of the bank this afternoon," continued the lawyer, bluffing confidently, "to discuss possible irregularities in the process." The mention of the superintendent had an immediate effect. Palmer cleared his throat, visibly backing down. "Perhaps we can find a more direct solution to this situation." While the administrative battle unfolded, Sophia and Daniel walked along the old trails surrounding the town. The young Montgomery showed Sophia an old map of the region. "This is the original layout of your grandfather's lands," he explained, pointing to marked areas. "It included the main spring and the best soils in the region." Sophia observed with a mixture of fascination and sadness. How did you get this? From my father's safe. Along with... He hesitated, visibly disturbed. The original document your grandfather signed, granting only right of passage for access to the river, not the sale of the property. Sophia's eyes widened. Daniel, that's the proof we need. He nodded, serious. I know, and I know what it means for my family. Why are you helping me? She asked, still suspicious. It's your inheritance at stake. Daniel stopped, looking at her intensely. Because I believe a life built on lies is doomed to crumble. My father always taught me that the Montgomery name meant honor and tradition. Now I've discovered it means exploitation and deception. A gentle wind stirred the leaves of the trees around them, as if nature itself was reacting to his words. Besides, continued Daniel with a half smile, in the last few days I discovered something worth more than any ranch. Sophia felt her face warm, but didn't look away. There was sincerity in those eyes, a sincerity that was beginning to break down the walls she had built. Are you sure you want to follow this path? She asked. Your family. My family needs to learn that some things are more important than money and status, he replied. Truth is one of them. That night, a decisive meeting was happening at the inn. Elaine, Sophia, Mr. Jenkins, and surprisingly, Daniel Montgomery were discussing the next steps. The auction is in 3 days, explained the lawyer. With the original documents Daniel brought, we can contest the ownership of at least 30% of the lands. Would that mean stopping the auction? Asked Elaine. Possibly, but it would be a long process with appeals and counter-appeals. Daniel, who had been quiet until then, intervened. There's another option. Let the auction happen. Everyone turned to him, surprised. My father has mobilized several businessmen in the region, he explained. People who owe him favors. They'll show up at the auction to ensure the ranch goes to someone friendly to his interests. How do you know this? Asked Sophia. I overheard a conversation last night. They plan to make consecutive bids, each exceeding the previous by minimal values to discourage any other interested party. Mr. Jenkins adjusted his glasses, thoughtful. That would be auction manipulation, illegal. And difficult to prove, added Daniel, unless someone breaks the circle of trust. A significant silence settled in the room. Elaine was the first to understand. You plan to expose the scheme during the auction? Daniel nodded. It's the only way to ensure a fair process and to finally correct a mistake that began with my grandfather. Sophia observed the young man with a new look. The courage he demonstrated, the willingness to confront his own father for what was right, were qualities she hadn't expected to find in a Montgomery. You'll face serious consequences, she warned, genuinely concerned. His smile was melancholic. Some consequences are worth it, don't you think? Their gazes met, and in that moment, a silent connection was established between them, something that went beyond surnames and the history that separated them. The next day, Pine Valley awoke agitated. The news that Elaine and Sophia, former humiliated employees of the Montgomerys, were participating in the auction spread like wildfire. Rumors about the true origin of the Montgomery fortune began to circulate, fueled by strategic comments from Mr. Jenkins in public places. At Joe's barbershop, customers discussed animatedly. I always thought it was strange how old Montgomery managed to expand the land so quickly, commented an elderly gentleman. But nobody questioned it back then. Those with money made the law. Different times now, replied Joe, trimming a beard. People don't accept being stepped on anymore. Across the street at the Central Bakery, another group conversed about the same topic. Have you seen Mrs. Elaine's daughter? Graduated in agricultural science, came back with plans to modernize production if she gets the land. They say Montgomery's son is helping them. Some have even seen them talking in the square. The world turns, doesn't it? Who would have thought? The atmosphere in town was one of expectation. After decades under the shadow of the Montgomerys, something was about to change in Pine Valley. At the mansion, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. William, upon discovering documents had disappeared from his safe, flew into an explosive rage. Was it you? He shouted at Daniel, grabbing him by the shirt. Did you take the papers? Catherine tried to separate them in panic. "William, please! He's your son." "My son wouldn't betray me," vociferated the patriarch, his face red with rage. "Wouldn't hand over our history to those what, Dad?" challenged Daniel, holding his gaze. "Victims? People our family destroyed. Through greed." The slap came quick and hard, echoing through the room. Catherine screamed, covering her mouth with her hands. Daniel remained motionless, the red mark forming on his face. "Get out of this house," hissed William, trembling with fury. "You are no longer my son." Without saying a word, Daniel turned and went up to his room. Minutes later, he came down with a small backpack. At the door, he turned one last time to his mother, who was crying silently. "I'm sorry, Mum, but I can't live with lies anymore." When the door closed behind him, Catherine turned to her husband, who was pouring himself another glass of whiskey. "What have you done, William? What have we done?" He didn't answer, lost in his own demons. On the morning of the auction, Pine Valley seemed a divided town. On one side, the traditional allies of the Montgomerys, businessmen and local ranchers, gathered in small groups, whispering strategies. On the other, an unusual alliance of small producers, former ranch employees, and residents who saw in the possible change a hope for better times. The auction would be held in the main hall of the town hall, a historic building in the center of town. Since early morning, curious onlookers had occupied the available chairs to witness what promised to be a memorable spectacle. Elaine and Sophia arrived discreetly, accompanied by Mr. Jenkins. They were dressed with simple elegance, Elaine in a classic navy blue dress, Sophia in a beige pantsuit. The difference between these confident women and the humiliated employees of 5 years ago couldn't be greater. On the other side of the hall, William observed with bloodshot eyes, accompanied by Catherine, who maintained a neutral expression, almost resigned. He wore his traditional light-colored suit, but seemed less imposing, as if something fundamental had been broken within him. The auctioneer, a man of quick speech and precise gestures, began the process at 10 o'clock sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now begin the auction of the property known as Sunrise Ranch, with a total area of 3,000 acres, including main house, installations, machinery and improvements. Starting bid, $5 million. A murmur ran through the hall. It was a considerable amount, but everyone knew the real value was much higher. $5,100,000, immediately offered a dairy industry businessman, following the agreed plan. $5,200,000, complimented another, a coffee producer from the region. The auctioneer barely had time to confirm one bid before another emerged, always in small increments, exactly as Daniel had predicted. Elaine and Sophia observed in silence, following the planned strategy. $6 million, finally offered a third man, after almost 20 minutes of controlled bidding. It was at this moment that Daniel entered the hall. All eyes turned to him, including his father's furious gaze. Without hesitation, the young Montgomery walked to the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before this auction continues, there's something everyone needs to know," he announced with a clear voice that echoed through the silent environment. The auctioneer tried to interrupt him. "Sir, this is irregular. The auction is in progress." "What's irregular," continued Daniel, ignoring the protest, "is the scheme set up to manipulate this auction." William stood up, red with fury. "Silence! You have no right." "I have the right to the truth, Dad, as does everyone here." With deliberate movements, Daniel removed from the folder he carried the original property documents. "These are the original deeds of the lands that today make up part of Sunrise Ranch." His voice was firm, despite the evident emotion. "Lands that legitimately belong to Thomas Miller, Sophia Miller's grandfather, present here today." A new murmur, more intense, ran through the hall. "These documents prove that my grandfather falsified the sale, forging Thomas's signature on a contract that never existed." He held up another paper. "And this is the original document, showing that the agreement was only for right of passage, not for property transfer." William advanced, but was restrained by 2 security guards. His face contorted with hatred, contrasted with his son's determined calm. "Traitor!" he shouted. "You're destroying your family's legacy." "I'm correcting a mistake, Dad," replied Daniel, without raising his voice. A mistake that lasted too long. He then turned to the auctioneer and the bank representative. Based on these documents, I formally request that at least 30% of the total area be excluded from the auction, as it legally belongs to the heirs of Thomas Miller. Chaos ensued. The bank representative had to temporarily suspend the auction, while legal consultants were urgently called. The crowd commented excitedly, divided between indignation and admiration for Daniel's gesture. In a discreet corner of the hall, Sophia approached him. "What you did," she began, with a breaking voice, "was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Daniel smiled slightly, despite the visible tension in his face. It wasn't courage, it was necessity, to finally be able to look in the mirror without shame. She lightly touched the still visible mark on his face, where his father had struck him. "Your father made his choice a long time ago," he completed, "just as I made mine today." After almost 2 hours of intense discussions and preliminary analyses of the documents, the bank representative returned with a decision. Considering the evidence presented and to avoid future processes that could nullify the entire procedure, the auction will be conducted for only 70% of the original property, excluding the disputed area until a definitive judicial decision. It was a partial victory, but significant. The businessmen allied with William, realizing the scheme was compromised, began to discreetly withdraw. The plan had crumbled. The auctioneer, visibly uncomfortable, resumed the proceedings. "We resume the auction of Sunrise Ranch now with an adjusted area of 2,100 acres. Current bid, $6 million. The silence that followed was revealing. Many of the original interested parties had left the hall, and those who remained seemed hesitant. $6,500,000, announced Sophia with a clear voice. New murmurs. William, who had remained seated after Daniel's intervention, raised his incredulous eyes. $6,600,000, offered one of the remaining businessmen almost automatically. $7 million, counterattacked Sophia without hesitation. The auction continued, now with only 2 active participants, Sophia and the businessman, who was beginning to show nervousness. When the value reached $8 million, he finally gave up. $8 million going once, announced the auctioneer, hitting the gavel on the table. Going twice. The tension was palpable. William stared fixedly at Sophia, a mixture of hatred and disbelief in his eyes. $8 million going for the third and final time. The gavel came down with finality. "Sold to Miss Sophia Miller." Spontaneous applause erupted from part of the audience. Elaine, who had remained composed throughout the process, finally let tears flow freely. Mr. Jenkins shook the hands of both women, genuinely moved. "We did it, Mum," whispered Sophia, hugging Elaine. "Grandpa finally got justice." From across the hall, Catherine helped a stunned William to stand. The man who had dominated Pine Valley for so long suddenly seemed aged, diminished. As he passed, "Daniel?" He cast him a final devastated look before leaving the room. Daniel observed his parents leaving with a mixture of sadness and relief. He had cut ties he never imagined breaking, but at the same time felt free from a weight he had carried, without realizing his entire life. Sophia approached him, still emotional from the victory. "And now?" she asked with a hesitant smile. He looked to the future, to the possibilities that opened before them. Now, the real work begins. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 3 months had passed since the historic auction that had transformed Pine Valley. The former Sunrise Ranch, now renamed New Dawn Farm, was experiencing a silent revolution under the administration of Sophia and Elaine Miller. The ranch house, once a symbol of opulence and segregation, had been transformed into an administrative and training center. The extensive halls that once hosted extravagant parties now housed training courses for small producers from the region. On a sunny spring Sunday, the farm opened its doors to the community for the first time in its history. Hundreds of residents from Pine Valley and the surrounding area walked freely through the gardens and facilities, admiring the changes and the new spirit of the place. On the central lawn, simple but elegantly decorated tables, offered typical foods prepared by employees' families. Children ran freely, filling with laughter a space that for decades had been a symbol of exclusion. Elaine, wearing a flowery dress and a straw hat, welcomed guests with the dignity of someone who had finally found her place. "It's almost unreal, isn't it?" commented Mr. Jenkins, observing the movement. "Seeing so many happy people in this place that caused so much suffering." "That's not irony, sir," replied Elaine with a serene smile. "It's justice. My father always said that land doesn't belong to who possesses it, but to who respects it and makes it flourish." Not far from there, Sophia was leading a group of visitors, explaining the new sustainable cultivation techniques they were implementing. "We've divided production into integrated modules," she explained, pointing to the verdant fields. "Each family is responsible for an area, but works in cooperation with the others. The result is a much more efficient and less aggressive use of the environment." "And the profits?" asked one of the neighboring ranchers, still skeptical. "They're distributed proportionally among all workers after necessary reinvestments," she replied simply. "We've discovered that when people feel truly part of the process, productivity naturally increases." Daniel, who accompanied the group, smiled with pride. In recent months, he had become a fundamental partner in the project, applying his biology knowledge to develop ecological solutions for old problems in local agriculture. His relationship with Sophia had gradually evolved, with mutual respect, transforming into something deeper. They worked side by side, transforming years of exploitation into a production model that was beginning to attract attention from the entire region. "My father would have considered this madness," commented Daniel when they were alone, observing the party from a distance. "Sharing profits with workers, opening the farm to the community." "And what do you consider it?" asked Sophia, genuinely interested. He smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "The best decision we ever made." As the sun began to set, Elaine climbed onto a small improvised platform to address the attendees. The crowd gradually silenced. "Friends of Pine Valley," she began, with a firm voice despite the evident emotion. "I thank everyone for your presence on this special day for my family, and I hope for our entire community." Those present applauded, encouraging her to continue. "Many here knew my father, Thomas Miller, a simple man who loved this land and dreamed of seeing it produce not just food but dignity and future." She paused, controlling her emotion. "Today, thanks to the work of my daughter Sophia, of Daniel, and of each one of you who believed in our vision, we are realizing that dream." New applause, more intense. "New Dawn Farm doesn't belong just to us, the Millers, just as it never truly belonged to the Montgomerys. It belongs to the land, to the work, to the sweat of those who really make it produce." From a discreet corner, a figure observed the scene with an indecipherable expression. William Montgomery, aged and lonely, had come attracted by a mixture of curiosity and bitterness. Beside him, Catherine observed with teary eyes the transformation of what had been her home. When Elaine finished her speech, the crowd dispersed, again returning to the tables and the music that was beginning to play. It was at this moment that Sophia noticed the presence of the former owner. "He came," she murmured to Daniel, discreetly indicating. The young man's expression became tense. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" Sophia reflected for a moment, observing the man who had made her family suffer so much. Instead of hatred, she was surprised to feel something close to compassion. "No, this farm is open to everyone today, remember?" With determined steps, she approached the Montgomery couple. William visibly stiffened but didn't retreat. "Mr. Montgomery," greeted Sophia with formal politeness. "Mrs. Montgomery, I didn't expect to see you here today." Catherine sketched a hesitant smile. "It looks beautiful, what you've done with the place." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Years of resentment and pain wouldn't disappear with a few polite words. Finally, it was William who broke the silence. "I came to see firsthand," he hesitated, the words seeming difficult, "how it is to destroy the work of a lifetime." Sophia held his gaze, without hostility, but without backing down. "We didn't destroy your work, Mr. Montgomery. We transformed it. just as you transformed my grandfather's work before." The blow was subtle but accurate. William looked away first. "The world has changed," continued Sophia, softening her tone. "Perhaps it's time to change with it." Elaine approached at that moment, noticing the tense conversation. Her gaze crossed with William's, and decades of silent history passed between them. "Thomas would have liked to see this," she said simply. "He always believed the land was generous to those who treated it with respect." William didn't answer, but something in his gaze subtly changed. For a brief instant, there seemed to be more weariness than anger. "Come, Catherine," he finally said, turning to leave. "We have nothing more to do here." When they were already walking away, Catherine stopped and turned to Elaine. "He'll never admit it, but he's sleeping better since he lost the ranch. The weight of keeping up appearances was destroying him inside." With these surprising words, she followed her husband, leaving the others thoughtful. The following weeks brought new challenges and achievements for New Dawn Farm. News of the transformation spread throughout the region, attracting visitors, researchers, and even a television channel that produced a report on the cooperative model implemented. On a particularly pleasant afternoon, Sophia and Daniel walked along the old trail that led to the main spring, now recovered and protected by a reforestation project. "We received 3 more consulting requests this week," commented Sophia, checking notes on her tablet. "Ranchers who want to implement our model, including one from Texas." Daniel smiled, satisfied. "We're creating something much bigger than a farm, aren't we?" "A movement, perhaps," she agreed, returning the smile. They sat by the spring, observing the crystalline water that emerged from between the rocks, nourishing the entire property. It was a perfect symbol of what they were building, something that started small, but had the potential to spread and generate life wherever it passed. "Sophia," began Daniel, suddenly serious, "there's something I've been thinking about for weeks." She looked at him with curiosity. "Sounds serious." "It is." He breathed deeply, seeking the right words. "When I began this journey with you and your mother, I was seeking redemption, a way to correct my family's mistakes." "And you succeeded," she assured him, gently touching his face. "More than you imagine." "But I found something I didn't expect," he continued, holding her hand. "I found a partner, someone who challenges and inspires me every day." Sophia's heart accelerated, anticipating what would come next. "I know our story began in an unusual way," he smiled, remembering their first tense encounters. "I was the son of the man who humiliated your family. You were the person who came to recover what was stolen. But now we're more than our surnames," she completed, with eyes shining with emotion. "Exactly." He took from his pocket a small wooden box, handcrafted. "So I want to ask if you would accept building something new with me, not just this farm, but a life." When he opened the box, Sophia saw not a traditional ring, but a delicate handcrafted piece made with native seeds and a small blue stone from the river that crossed the property. "It's not a diamond," he explained, a little nervous. "I thought something born from this land would be more meaningful." Tears came before Sophia could control them. "It's perfect," she whispered. "And yes, I accept building this life with you." The embrace that followed was like the completion of a cycle that had begun decades before. Where there had been pain and injustice, now something new and promising was flourishing. On the way back to the main house, they found Elaine supervising the harvesting of medicinal herbs, a new project she had started with women from the community. "From your smiles, I imagine something important has happened," she commented, as perceptive as always. Sophia showed the improvised ring to her mother, who examined it with emotional eyes. "Your grandfather used to say life is like planting," said Elaine, hugging her daughter. "Sometimes we take a while to see the fruits, but they always come to those who sow with love and patience." That night, a small celebration was improvised on the main porch. Employees, neighbors, and friends gathered to celebrate not just the engagement, but all the transformations of recent months. Old Joe, now a frequent visitor to the farm, raised a toast to Pine Valley, which for so long lived in the shadow of one name and now flourishes under the sun of many hands working together. Glasses were raised in agreement. The party extended into the night, with music, stories, and the shared sensation that something genuinely new was being born in that piece of America. While the celebration continued, Sophia found a moment to step away and observe everything from a distance. From a corner of the porch, she contemplated the starry sky of rural Tennessee, so different from the nights of her childhood in the Northeast. Daniel found her there and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "How life comes full circle," she replied, leaning against him. "5 years ago I was serving drinks on this porch, listening to your father humiliate me. Today we're celebrating our engagement in the same place." He reflected on the depth of that transformation. "Do you believe in destiny?" he asked, thoughtful. "I believe in consequences," she replied. "Each choice we make creates waves that spread far beyond what we can see." Suddenly, a movement on the road leading to the farm caught their attention. A car was slowly approaching, its headlights cutting through the darkness of the night. When it parked near the house, Sophia immediately recognized William Montgomery's old Cadillac. The couple exchanged surprised looks. "What does he want now?" muttered Daniel, tense. "Let's find out." They approached the car as William was getting out alone. Unlike the last visit, there was no evident hostility in his demeanor, just a strange determination. "Good evening," Sophia greeted formally. William nodded in acknowledgement. "I heard about the celebration," he said, indicating the lights and music coming from the house, "and about the engagement." Daniel stepped forward, subtly placing himself between his father and Sophia. "Did you come to congratulate us or make threats?" The direct question seemed to hit William like a physical blow. For a moment, the mask of control faltered, revealing something unexpectedly vulnerable. "I came to deliver something," he finally replied, removing an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "Something that rightfully belongs to this land." He extended the envelope to Sophia, who accepted it cautiously. "What is this?" "The deeds to the lands that were left out of the auction," he explained, with a controlled voice. "The 30% that you legally proved belong to your family. I'm officially transferring them, without the need for more processes or legal disputes." The astonishment on Daniel and Sophia's faces was evident. "Why?" asked Daniel, incredulous. "I thought you'd fight for every inch until the end." William looked away to the dark horizon, where only the outlines of the hills were visible against the starry sky. "I spent my life defending a legacy I believed was honorable," he began, with a new fragility in his voice, "only to discover it was built on sand, on lies that my father taught me to perpetuate." Sophia observed this man, so different from the imposing figure who had humiliated her years before. "Catherine is ill," he continued after a pause. "I don't want to spend my last years with her in courtrooms, defending something that, deep down, I know doesn't belong to me." "I'm sorry about Mrs. Montgomery," said Sophia sincerely. William nodded in thanks. "She was the one who convinced me, actually. Said it was time to sleep in peace with our choices." A rare, near emotion showed in his voice. "I think I finally understood what she meant." Daniel observed his father with a new look, seeing for the first time the man beyond the authoritarian figure he had known his entire life. "Thank you," said Sophia, holding the envelope with respect. "This means a lot to my family." "Use this land well," replied William with a renewed dignity. "From what I've seen, you know how to do that better than I ever did." With that, he extended his hand to the young woman. A simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. Sophia accepted, silently sealing the end of a cycle of decades of resentment. When he turned to Daniel, there was an evident hesitation. Father and son looked at each other, years of misunderstandings hanging between them. "You were right," William finally admitted, "about many things." "It wasn't easy to oppose you," replied Daniel. "I know, and that—" William cleared his throat, fighting against decades of pride. "That makes me respect your choice." The embrace that followed was brief and awkward but sincere. Catherine was right. Some weights are harder to carry than others. Before leaving, William turned one last time to the couple. "Invite us to the wedding if you can forgive a stubborn old man enough. Catherine would be happy." With that, he got into the car and left, leaving behind not just a document, but the last vestige of a dispute that had defined several generations. Back at the party, they found Elaine animatedly conversing with guests. Seeing their expressions, she approached, concerned. "What happened?" Sophia handed her the envelope, briefly explaining the unexpected visit. Elaine examined the documents with trembling hands. "It's complete," she confirmed, amazed. "All the lands that belong to my father, legally ours now. No disputes, and no more legal battles," added Sophia. Elaine carefully folded the papers, returning them to the envelope with reverence. "Your grandfather always said that true victory isn't defeating the enemy," she commented with wisdom. "It's transforming them into an ally." That night, as the party continued under Pine Valley's starry sky, New Dawn Farm seemed to finally live up to its name. A new cycle was really beginning, built not on humiliation and revenge, but on reconciliation and possibilities. 6 months later, the farm was unrecognizable. The old main house, once a symbol of ostentation, had been transformed into an educational center where young people from the region learned modern sustainable agriculture techniques. The fields, once dedicated mainly to export monoculture, now displayed a diversified mosaic of productions, from community organic gardens to areas of traditional crops, all integrated into a system that respected natural cycles. Sophia and Daniel's wedding was celebrated in the farm's gardens, in a simple but moving ceremony that brought together the entire community. Elaine, radiant in a sky-blue dress, led her daughter down the path, decorated with native flowers. Among the guests, seated discreetly in one of the last rows, were William and Catherine Montgomery. He still uncomfortable but visibly moved, she fragile from illness, but with eyes bright with satisfaction at seeing her son finding his way. The officiant, Daniel's former professor from college, conducted a ceremony that spoke not just of love between two people, but of reconciliation between families and renewal of an entire community. "We rarely witness unions that represent so much more than the love between two people," he said, looking at the bride and groom and then at the guests. "This wedding symbolizes the healing of old wounds, the possibility of new beginnings, the proof that the cycle of pain can be broken when we choose a different path." When the vows were exchanged, there wasn't a dry eye at the ceremony. Sophia and Daniel had written words that celebrated not just their love, but the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. "In you, I found not just love, but the courage to break with patterns that seemed inevitable," said Daniel, holding Sophia's hands. "You taught me that our story isn't written by our surnames or by our family's past, but by the choices we make each day." Sophia's words were equally moving. "When I returned to Pine Valley, I carried in my heart a purpose very different from what I ended up finding. I thought recovering these lands meant winning an old battle. You showed me that it meant, in fact, starting a new story, a story we build together, not on the ruins of the past, but on the hope of the future." The party that followed was a perfect reflection of the farm's new spirit, inclusive, joyful, celebrating the community's diversity. Traditional Tennessee dishes mixed with Northeastern recipes brought by Elaine in a banquet that represented the union of different worlds. In a quiet moment of the celebration, Daniel found his father alone observing the distant fields. "Thank you for coming," he said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. William accepted the drink with a nod. "Your mother wouldn't miss it for anything. And I'm learning to accept the new times." A comfortable silence established itself between them, something unthinkable just a year before. "This land is flourishing like I've never seen before," William finally commented, indicating the fields with a gesture. "Even in the best years, under my management." "It's the method," explained Daniel. "Sophia implemented techniques that respect the natural balance, less aggressive, more sustainable in the long run, and fairer to those who work on them," completed William, with a new understanding in his voice. Daniel studied his father with renewed interest. The intransigent and authoritarian man seemed to have given way to someone more reflective, capable of recognizing his own mistakes. "It's never too late to learn, is it?" he commented, lightly toasting with his father. William smiled, possibly the first genuine smile in a long time. "Your grandfather would say I'm a lost cause. But your mother, she always believed people can change. From the other side of the garden, Sophia was talking with some young students from the new educational center when Elaine approached with a small wooden box. "I thought today would be the perfect day for this," she said, handing the object to her daughter. Sophia opened the box carefully, revealing an old pocket watch with the inscription TM engraved on the lid. "It was Grandpa's?" she asked, moved. Elaine nodded. "The only thing I managed to save when we had to leave the lands. He used to say that time is the only truly impartial judge. That truth may take time, but it always finds its way to light." Sophia hugged her mother for a long time, feeling the weight and lightness of that inheritance. The watch represented not just the recovered past, but the promise of a future built on more solid and just foundations. As the night progressed, guests began to say goodbye. Catherine, visibly tired but satisfied, approached Sophia to say goodbye. "Take good care of him," she said with a look that encompassed both Daniel and the farm. "Montgomery men can be stubborn, but they have heart." "I will," promised Sophia, gently hugging her mother-in-law. "And you are always welcome here." "Who would have thought?" murmured Catherine with a nostalgic smile. "It seems the farm finally found its true guardians." When the last guest departed, Sophia and Daniel walked hand in hand to the natural viewpoint that offered a panoramic view of the property. Under the moonlight, the farm's contours extended in all directions, a landscape transformed by the vision and work of many hands. "We've achieved something extraordinary here," commented Daniel, embracing his now wife. "Something that goes far. Beyond us." Sophia nodded, leaning against him. "You know what my mother told me today? That my grandfather always believed this land had its own soul, that it chose its guardians." "And it chose well," completed Daniel, kissing her forehead. The next morning, work would begin again. There would be challenges, certainly. The model they were implementing was innovative and would face resistance. But looking at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise over New Dawn Farm, Sophia knew they were on the right path. The story that had begun with humiliation 5 years before had transformed into something much greater, an example that true wealth isn't in accumulation, but in sharing, not in exploitation, but in cooperation, not in revenge, but in the capacity to transform pain into hope. That was the true legacy they were building now, not just for themselves, but for the entire Pine Valley community. A new cycle had begun, and this time it was planted in fertile soil of justice and reconciliation.